we have Brad Bailey from the SCO office to talk about some of the landing site decision factors for CLPS missions.
Thanks, Erica and Angela. I really appreciate the intro and the lead into this talk. I'm really here to talk to you all about how we go about making landing site decisions. I know that many here are from the science community and believe that science should be driving everything to the exclusion of all else. But unfortunately, that's not the world we live in sometimes, and there are certain programmatic decision factors that need to be taken into account. And so, while in the long run, or in the short run, you may not agree with some of our statements or wonder, hey, that's deviating from what we discussed in this workshop, we at least want you to understand the issues that are driving a lot of our decisions on what we're doing with CLPS and when. And so hopefully at the end of this, you all will say, oh, okay, I understand. I don't agree, or oh, that's a much more difficult problem than I originally thought it was going to be. But we'll see at the end of this presentation, I suppose. Next slide, please. This is just a quick reminder of what we are planning on doing with CLPS within the next 4 years. If you look at this slide and don't get excited, then you're probably in the wrong profession, because between now and 2025, we have 10 landings on the lunar surface planned, and many of them are already on contract with our CLPS vendors. Of course, we're starting out with Intuitive Machines and Astrobotic in 2022, and then also Intuitive Machines with delivery of STMD's Prime 1 to the South Pole in 22. We're also delivering Viper and going to the South Pole with Volatiles Investigations, and Mare Crisium with geophysics instruments in 23. We've got one delivery in 24, Reiner Gamma. Many of you probably saw Intuitive Machines was selected for that yesterday as well. And then we have a slew of things coming up in 25, including the Prism 1B deliveries of FSS and Litmus to Schrodinger Basin. Then we also are going to Gruithuisen and another South Pole delivery in 25. So long story short, there's a wealth of opportunities coming up to get instruments down to the lunar surface, and the results from this workshop really will help develop that overall science strategy that will, again, guide us on how and where we go, when, and with what capabilities. Now, next slide, please. Now that said, kind of a little bit of the history of how we got to where we are. We had the initial calls when we were first standing up the CLPS program for the NPLPs and LSIPs, and those were largely schedule driven. We were largely soliciting for instruments that were fairly high TRL. Their flight spares or engineering units, et cetera, that were reasonably far along in development, so that we could make sure that we had an appropriate manifest for those early deliveries. Now that said, even though they were schedule driven, we're also expecting high quality science from them. It's not just we weren't just throwing any old thing on there. There's high heritage for all of these, and reasons that there's high heritage for them. So we do expect high science, and we wanted to demonstrate that good science could be done from the CLPS platform. Now, we wanted to evolve that philosophy into a little bit more science question-driven investigations, and that's where PRISM comes in, where we're really focused on a specific question that can be answered with a suite of instruments, and then we go from there. And then as we continue to evolve the program, we'll get increased capabilities from the vendors that come at a cost. And that's going to be part of the discussion coming up. But they come at a cost, but those increased capabilities will continue to afford us evolved and enhanced investigations from the lunar surface. And so as we're moving forward, we'll be integrating in those increased capabilities into that science strategy that you all will be helping us develop today. And with that, we'll go to the next slide, please. Here's just a quick overview of the things I'm going to talk about. So clearly science, yay science, but then there are budget considerations, vendor capabilities, their agency priorities. We have international contributions, and then timelines and schedules that are all factors. So if you go to the next slide. First and foremost, of course, is science. I mean, why are we doing this if it's not for science? And so really science is the primary driver for what SMD-led CLPS deliveries are doing. It's important to note SMD-led, there is the possibility for HEO and STMD mission directorates to, or HEO now the ESDMD and SOMD mission directorates to charter their own CLPS deliveries through the CLPS office. But I'm primarily going to be talking about SMD-led CLPS deliveries for the purpose of this discussion. And those science topics are driven by the community input. And so many of these are the ones you just heard Erica talk about, the decadal SCIM report, that the actual report that she was talking about, the Lunar Science for Land and Missions, the ASMSAT, the League Exploration Roadmap, and then of course there's the Artemis 3 SDT report, and of course this workshop. So really appreciate you all taking your time to let's see, I think, yeah, I'm told I only have 3 minutes left, so I'm hoping that's not true because I didn't really get very far into my presentation. So if you could adjust the timer at some point, that'd be great, Ricky, thank you. And so anyway, really appreciate you all taking the time out to contribute to the overall strategy for what we're trying to accomplish with CRIPS. And really, we just are trying to ensure that science is achievable with the capabilities that we have and we have budget for. So it's just important to remember that. And it's also important to remember that it's not just geological sciences that we're representing here. All science that is represented by SMD divisions is fair game. So heliophysics, astrophysics, biological and physical sciences, and earth sciences are all represented in addition to planetary. So you may see some calls come out that have a little bit more of a helio or astro focus as we move forward. And so hopefully the members of those community are represented here today, so that they can make sure that they're worked into the overall strategy. Next slide, please. Okay, budget. Budget kind of rules all. I'm not telling you all anything you don't know, but it is important to think about the different budgets or pots of money that the CLPS world lives within. So I'm sure all of you are familiar with PRISM, and notionally we have about $30 million per delivery. That's what our overall budgets is. And you know, there's some arguments for higher than that. There's some arguments for lower than that. But at least per delivery, 30 million is what we're aiming for. Now that said, there's the other half of the equation, and that's the delivery budget. This is the money that goes to the vendors to deliver our instruments for us to the lunar surface. And that varies. I mean, you all have seen the announcements, the one CP11 for delivering of Lunar Vertex to Reiner Gamma, announced yesterday. Intuitive Machines won that contract, was for 77.5 million, I think, if that's right. So so that kind of gives you at least an understanding of what a static lander will cost us in, you know, on average. It fluctuates up and down. You can go through the numbers yourselves for past awards, but that kind of gives you a rough idea of where we are in terms of what a delivery budget looks like for a static lander. Now, as the requirements that are fed forward from all the instruments, either through PRISM or through contributions from the other mission directorates or internationals, et cetera, as those start increasing, as we start, you know, to want to evolve and do bigger and better investigations, those costs are going to go up naturally, and that's to be expected. When we need more resources, it's going to cost us more, and so we are committed overall to doing 2 deliveries per year, and that's that's what we're working towards. One of the things we're trying to do is sustain a lunar economy, or at least stand up a lunar economy so that it can sustain itself in the long run, of course. But in order to really keep a healthy amount of money flowing into this community, really 2 RFTPs to the vendors per year is what we're aiming for, and hopefully more as we get other deliveries committed from the other mission directorates. But again, those delivery budgets again are not solely based on mass. There are overall requirements to manifest. There are other considerations such as power and comm and deployment mechanisms, and whether or not it needs to be EMI clean, for example. And all of those are unknown costs, and they're overall hard to plan for in this competitive environment that we find ourselves. And those prices fluctuate up and down based on market value. As the vendors get more experience, cost naturally goes down. But then as we increase our requirements based on the payloads that we want to fly, those costs go up. And so there are a lot of knobs that turn on what those numbers actually look like, and those all relate back into what our annual budget is for deliveries. Okay, I think that's enough about budget. I think you all get it, but next slide, please. Vendor capability. So I already talked about this a little bit, but each vendor has their own philosophy on how they're investing money in order to develop these new capabilities. They're trying to read the tea leaves and understand what NASA wants, and then they're going to make investments into providing that new technology for us. And so having this roadmap and strategy in place ultimately helps those vendors with those strategic investments overall. And so it's incredibly important that we do evolve the program, because I think all of us would agree that just putting down static landers on the surface will only get us so far from a science perspective. But that said, we've talked to the CLPS vendors so far and said, look, at some point in the future, we're going to be asking for survive and operating throughout the lunar night capabilities, mobility, which you've seen in the Prism 2 selection or announcement and solicitations on the street right now. EMI cleanliness for super sensitive measurements, operation in PSRs and cold regions. Definitely something we're really interested in, and wondering if we can put the ingenuity and innovation of the commercial sector to use and figure out ways of doing that. And then, of course, sample return. Really would like to see whether the CLPS vendors are capable of bringing samples back for us. But again, these are all unknown costs per capability, and that does affect our long-term budgeting and planning. We can go forward with RFIs and try and figure out how much that's going to cost, but ultimately we won't know what that looks like until we actually ask for it and get bids in from the vendors to figure out how much each one of these costs. And so again, that makes it difficult for us to budget and understand how each of these are going to play out in the long run. So next slide, please. Thank you. Yes, agency priorities. Okay, so there are a lot of things that go into this, and again, it's not just science, but what are the priorities of NASA as a whole, and how can we help address those? So CLPS, as many of you are aware, it's managed out of the Science Mission Directorate, but it is largely an agency resource. So it means it can be used by STMD, ESDMD, and SOMD, which are the 2 mission directorates that came out of HUMD recently. But CLPS may also be used by other government agencies in collaboration with NASA. And it's important to realize that not every delivery will have a NASA-specific payload on it, although it would be hard. I'm not saying that they won't, because we'd be hard-pressed to not have a NASA payload on there, but it is a possibility in the long run. I will also tell you that all SMD-led CLPS deliveries have agreed to fly up to 25 kilograms on average from STMD and ESD based on each of those mission directorates priorities. And so those are flown in conjunction with the Prism SMD payloads. And I also want to point out that that's vice versa. So when there are STMD deliveries, then there is 25 kilograms worth of space for SMD payloads as well. So we're definitely working back and forth, making sure that all of the priorities of the major mission directorates interested in the lunar surface are being addressed and answered with CLPS deliveries overall. I will also say that SMD is roughly alternating polar and non-polar CLPS deliveries. So we're kind of planning at this moment 50% of our deliveries to be polar. Now that said, there's plenty of amazing, wonderful science we done at polar regions. You may say, well, does that necessitate 50%? And I would say, well, yes and no. While there's wonderful science could be done, we're also, trying to characterize the polar environment to help buy down risk associated with future crew deliveries and really just like I said, characterizing that entire environment is important, not just from crew, but also from a science perspective as well. So we'll get wonderful, valuable science from those deliveries, but we're also helping out our HEO colleagues who are in turn flying a lot of science to the moon with their crew delivery. So there's a lot of give and take back and forth between the mission directors as well. Let's see. We also have potential for science support deliveries for Artemis crewed missions. For example, we have, as many of you are aware, there are down mass limitations on what we can accomplish with human landing system. And so if we have a need for more science or bulkier items that need to go down to the surface for crewed missions, then there's a chance we may have to use CLPS deliveries in order to make that happen. And then I already mentioned this, but we do have an overall SEO and agency goal to foster that sustained lunar economy where NASA is but one of many customers, and so that is a factor that we're trying to look at overall, and it does factor in. I will also say that it's not written down here, but as you all know, we work for the government, and politics is woven throughout everything that we do. So so that definitely is a factor. Next slide, please.
Hey, Brad, we want to move to the panel here shortly, so I know you've just got a couple more slides yet. But...
Yeah, I'm almost done, but I've also you also gave me 5 minutes to talk during the panel, so I'm going to maybe use those 5 minutes right now.
Yeah, so you can use your panel introduction time a little bit, but just so we can make sure the others get a chance to talk soon.
Sure. No, thanks, Ryan. And so international partners, we do have international partners that are able to contribute in a couple of different ways. One is through selected Prism suites where they're part of the competitively selected process. And the other way is through direct collaboration with the NASA sponsoring mission directorate. And larger international contributions from that they can actually form key portions of the overall CLPS manifest and can allow us to solicit for complementary instruments through Prism, and those in part drive landing site selection. And so far, many of our international partners are interested in polar locations that will contribute down to Artemis. That's what we've seen thus far. That's not exclusively the case, as you've seen. ESA and CASI have instruments coming up. But we do have international partners that do help drive landing site selection. So next slide, please. Timelines and schedules. I'm closing in on the end here. We do have coordination with ESD and SMD on support and deconfliction of landing locations and timing associated with Artemis missions. So while we may want some CLPS deliveries to support CLPS or support Artemis missions, there are, we also don't want to be taking up the valuable real estate on the lunar surface with CLPS deliveries such that we can't go there with Artemis anymore due to safety concerns and whatnot. So So we are definitely coordinating with them. I also wanted to let people know that there are lead times associated with Eclipse deliveries from RFP to delivery, and those are about 30 to 34, 36 months or so time frame. And so at this time, through discussions with the vendors, those landing sites really need to be broadcast to the vendor pool as far ahead as possible. And so at this moment, those lead times really are ahead of Prism solicitation. So we do at this moment select Prism, we select landing sites for Prism solicitations. That said, at some point in the future, we are open to allowing the community to determine landing sites, but we really need to make sure that that requirement from the vendors is lessened or removed in terms of that lead time for them to kind of do their planning and tweaking their system to make sure they have the appropriate performance out of their landers. And of course, we do have a CLPS office that is doing all of this, and that CLPS office support is limited. They do the reviewing proposals, setting up procurement, running payload workshops, working with vendors on planning, integration, et cetera. And so we do have a limitation there. It's not a hard limitation, but it is a factor. So next slide, please. And I'm almost done, Ryan, I promise. I put this in as hodgepodge. So also diversity of sites is important to showcase the range of capabilities and to address the range of high priority science that's been identified in the Lunar Science for Land Admissions workshop reports, et cetera, and all the other community documents. And it's also meant to reduce proposal fatigue within the community, such that having a diversity of sites, say I have this thing that would work really well within a lunar swirl, for example. Okay, I see we're gonna have another lunar swirl down in mission 2 years down the road, so I don't have to submit every single time to every Prism proposal opportunity. But I do want to make sure and stress that this does not mean we'll revisit a site or terrain type. If the community prioritizes it and resources and capabilities allow for it, then we absolutely will revisit terrain types. Next slide, please. And then all of this is gone through the CLPS Manifest Selection Board process. We call it the CMSB. NASA loves its crazy acronyms. So the CMSB is the way that we actually select those manifests. And so it's kind of an eye chart, and I won't go through it all right now, but there is a process by which a mission directorate or an international partner identifies a need for a CLPS delivery or a payload they'd like to have flown. We go through the process of kind of fitting Tetris pieces together to figure out what makes sense in what time frame and with what capabilities are coming out from the vendors. And then we select a pre-manifest, and then we go forward from there into solicitations for Prism example. And during that time, there's also accommodations review for those pre-manifested payloads. And they're kind of mature their design overall, and then we finalize the manifest and go forward to a board. So there is an overall process, and the CMSB has representation from all the major mission directorates, including SMD, HEOMD, STMD, as well as OIR, our Office of International Agency Relations, and it's chaired by Joel Kearns, the DAX Deputy AA for Exploration. Next slide, please. And I think that's my get off the stage slide. Summary. Several factors must be considered, etc. And ultimately, this workshop will help us overall. And what we're really trying to accomplish is high-end impactful science. We need to fit within the overall delivery budget and agency priorities. And we also want to broadcast to the vendor pool the capabilities required to accomplish these goals. And we also want to allow for community members to plan their proposal resources accordingly. We know there's going to be a lot of proposal opportunities coming out soon, not only just for CLPS, but for Artemis. And so it's going to be wonderful for the lunar community, but it's also going to be exhausting, not only from a proposal writing perspective, but from a panel review perspective. So please, if you're not proposing, please volunteer for panels, because we're going to need you over the next couple of years. That's it for me. Thanks.
Thanks, Brad.